There is no audio said in the,
I just
so that's fixed.
get better now.
Okay, Liz says that's fixed now. Okay. Katie, from planning, did you have any report or update for us? Hi, Katie.
Hi there. Yes, I do. I want to let you know that we are planning on re-advertising our senior planner position in mid-August, and we'll have Terry Carroll on board for that interview process. So we're looking forward to getting that position filled. And even with a pretty aggressive timeline, it probably will be later in the fall before we could get anyone on board. The Business Energy Advisors Program is still moving along. Terry is covering that program in the interim until we get a new senior planner on board. It's operating, welcoming new participants. Terry just recently reviewed a BEA options report with one of our participants and is looking to set up an energy charrette in August. So that's still going. Also, Terry's been spending quite a bit of time working with internal county people as well as NYSEG and a group we contract with called Dude Solutions on getting e-billing and figuring out the county's energy billing system and tracking. It's been a bear for a very long time now, and many people have tried to fix this problem, and it's really great to have somebody who can dive in and put the time in that's really required to try to fix our billing issues with NYSEG. Also, Terry let me know that he and Arel have been meeting with Johnson Controls on reviewing these Flex Tech reports. These are the in-depth energy studies of various buildings in the county. And they've had a couple of meetings already and have asked for some revisions. And they're going to have another meeting in early August just to try to get some better numbers and a plan moving forward for this green facilities planning work.
Is that for the existing facilities, Katie?
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
They've also been working on, so Terry and Scott Doyle and our finance department have been working together on EV purchasing and bids. So this year we're looking to purchase 11 electric vehicles, including vehicles for the health department, recycling materials management, ITS, and facilities. In addition, the sheriff's office is looking at purchasing 4 new hybrid patrol vehicles. So that's exciting as well. And then the last item I wanted to update you on, again in the energy sphere, is that on July 13th, Terry submitted to the Public Service Commission a petition for rehearing reconsideration of Tompkins County's proposal to reduce natural gas use up at the airport with the geothermal project. I believe you all knew that the PSC decided to pull that proposal from the approval. And so this is a petition to rehear that. And there were 2 factual issues that in the way these things are written, they're called error of fact. And so we just pointed these out to them. One was around the timing of when the geothermal system came on board relative to the request for proposals that NYSEG issued. What they said just wasn't true, and we corrected that issue. And then the other one was about whether the load reduction of gas was already included in the calculations when NYSEG put that number out, and for sure it was not. So we just tried to make that clear so they could reconsider their decision.
Great, thank you. I'm glad that that was submitted. Deborah?
Are we fairly optimistic about this? I mean, is it your understanding that the PSC's action was based on these 2 errors?
Well, I know Terry had a meeting with Department of Public, DPS staff and NYSEG, and he actually came away feeling fairly pessimistic that any changes were to be made. I think they see a project that's done already and they want to put money toward things that haven't been done yet, even though it's very unfair and it wasn't what was promised us. So not good.
Oh, well, that's great news, Katie. Thanks.
We're still hopeful. I mean, we put it in. we're hope. I think Terry did a great job writing a convincing argument. It's very clear, specific. So we'll keep you posted.
Thanks. Thank you. And I think that was for 1.5 million. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Katie. Any other questions for Katie? Martha Robertson here has a question.
Hey, Katie.
Hello.
I know there are real protocols about this, but do you think there's any other way to, influence DPS, any other conversations that might be had? This really is not, this is not at all what was promised.
Well, I know that Mike Hall was planning on contacting the governor's office and speaking to some people there he thought could be influential in the process.
Okay. I believe, is John Majori now also on the Public Service Commission? I know John Howard was, John Majori is another one of 4 or 5 Cuomo people who keep moving around to key positions like John Howard. So I think I saw his name on the list. So maybe a political approach that Mike can manage is
I would suggest coordinating with Mike if you have any political action you'd like to do behind the scenes to make sure you're targeting the.
Okay, all right. Thanks, Katie. All right, that's good to know. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Katie. And just so folks know, for this meeting, I know it's really hard to see us in the Zoom here at the legislature. So I know when sometimes I've attended meetings via Zoom in this new format, it's hard to see who's speaking here, especially. So I'll try and make sure I say somebody's full name that's going to be asking you guys questions or comments, so you'll know who it is here, at least of us little people here. Liz, so I know the audio was off at first, so we added your discussion at the end after the Cornell Cooperative, well, it's not directly from Cornell, but the Community Food Systems Plan. So we do have you on the agenda, so thank you for coming. And then is it Scott, Katie, that will be doing the resolutions? He usually does these. Okay, hi Scott.
Hi, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
Great, and I can see you quite well. I look forward to actually attending in person again soon here, but this is working pretty well.
Oh, good. I hope it's not, I hope it's sooner than you'd need a snowmobile to get here.
Right.
But if he does, there'll be a path.
Right.
So,
Go ahead, Scott.
you ready to introduce this? Yeah, great.
Yes.
I tell you what, I'm fresh back from a trip to the Maine woods that drew quite a bit of inspiration on the conservation and kind of trails front, including a little bit of snowmobile piece. So I'm carrying a little bit of that. The item I'm presenting here today is much more administrative, so that innovation maybe won't shine through. But on packet page 9, of course, that sets up the neg deck. But I just wanted to call out a couple of the attachments just to highlight kind of what you're looking at here. On packet page 10, the memo kind of outlines what we're looking at. This is really adding back in trails that were previously recognized by the county for snowmobile trail maintenance over the years. It's really the connection. It's 10.5 miles that in essence connects Potato Hill, Safe Forest to Hammond Hill. You'll see in that memo, really took care to make sure we involved, or people were aware of this reintroduction from across the towns. I know certainly town supervisors across the county, there's a county connector too. into Tioga County. Those folks are really helpful in the process too. And then, of course, the legislators in each of the districts. I think I see Dan there too, so I appreciate you getting back to me quickly on that too, Dan. I will note, moving on packet page 12, you'll see what feels to be a little heftier EAF for the nature of this re-addition of snowmobile trail. The reason why that is, as noted in the memo, is this is, we determined this to be a type 1 action. You know, we take these, of course, very seriously, the environmental assessment forms, because it falls in a portion of the ag district. So we took that, you know, seriously, and that we did the long form to make sure we are assessing all the impacts correctly. The other piece I just want to point out, and I can field questions of that, is packet page 37 gives you a sense of where those, again, previously existing trails are coming back in that connect, again, those areas. It's a little bit orphaned, so we also included back to the packet page 38, the kind of whole system of snowmobile trails that exist in the county, and have some of these jogs across counties too, to make those connections, because of course, as many of you know, those connections on the snowmobile trails are kind of critical, that connect these pieces that, you know, some of these kind of formal protected lands that make sure to make those connections. So anyway, that's my 50% overview. I'm happy to field questions on both the resolutions or any of these supporting documents.
Okay, how about we'll move the first one? Do you want to move it, Deborah? Or-
Yeah, I also had a question, but I'll make it sure.
Okay, so we'll move the first resolution and Dave will second that. All right, Deborah, Dawson has a question.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. It's nice to see you. Yeah, I really appreciated the thoroughness of this EAF. And I was pleased to see that you had spoken with all of the landowners whose properties would be affected. The only real concern I had about this is, and maybe I shouldn't be worried about it, is on packet page 18, it said hours of operation. And it was like during the season, 24/7. Do the property owners know this, or is this just something you always put in because these trails are not open, they're not closed, they're just there?
Yeah, that's what we determined to get a sense of, hey, this trail use could be at different times. I mean, it's a potential. As you know, you may know, for using those spaces, there's sometimes a periodic use. It's usually not an around the clock thing, but theoretically, you know, there can be some nighttime and morning usage of trails with snowmobiles. It's not, I wouldn't say from my experience of being out in those areas that it's a consistent thing, but you know, it's an irregular kind of occurrence that I don't think is often through the night, but there are some, you know, later night uses.
So putting that in is just kind of a CYA kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it's acknowledging the impact. I mean, partly when I do the assessment forms, I like to look at the real potential, the honest potential of that. I mean, and that is, you know, one of the real impacts of that use is it is sometimes a noisier use for sure. And so acknowledging that and then recognizing the impacts associated with that are something that's significant. I will tell you too, in the kind of outreach with the different folks on the memo and other people I talked to, it didn't come up as that was any particular concern, or nor were there any concerns about kind of this type of use being reestablished. I didn't hear that, at least.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Scott? Okay, so the resolution on the floor is on packet page 9, and that's doc ID 10264. This is making a negative declaration of environmental significance in relation to resolution, and it doesn't have a number. Right one? Okay. That will get a number later. Authorization to submit application to this New York State Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation to reestablish 2 snowmobile trails in Tompkins and Tioga. Anything else before we vote? Okay, all in favor? That's unanimous in favor. Thank you. And then our next resolution. Let me get the page on there. A second here.
Page 39.
Thank you. Trying to go through the computer takes a little longer. Okay, packet page 39, the next resolution that's paired with this is authorization to submit application to the New York State Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation to reestablish 2 snowmobile trails in Tompkins County and Tompkins and Fayette County, doc ID 10265. And Dan is going to move that and Dave second. Okay, it sounds like we had a lot of probably questions answered. Any other questions or comments or anything else you want to say, Scott?
No, I just think this is an important kind of, it is administrative, but I think it's an important thing to these trail users to make sure that this is adequately supported by us. I mean, we really are a pass through, but I think it's good to get this money out to those folks to adequately maintain these trails. So that's the only note I'll make.
Okay, thank you. All in favor? That's unanimous in favor. That passes. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Scott. And I wanted to say glad you're back, but you might want to rather be in Maine, but glad you had a great trip. Let's put it that way.
It's great to be back. Thank you.
And thanks for joining us.
Yeah, back.
Okay, moving right along, we have Baz Perry representing the Community Food System Plan. Am I pronouncing your name correctly, Baz?
Yes, that's it. Thank you so much.
Okay, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Yeah, thanks for having me here. I'm representing the Food Policy Council. I'm the Agriculture and Food Systems team leader at CC Tompkins. And it's my pleasure to be here while Katie is, who is the coordinator for the project, is away on family leave with her baby boy. And while my boss, Graham Savio, is also at home with the new baby boy. And excuse me, while Don Barber, the chair of the council, enjoys his annual vacation with grandchildren. And so it makes me think about all these new family members who are going to become a part of hopefully a more resilient, equitable, and sustainable food system in the future. If we can all work together and make sure that we build one that sustains and nourishes all life. And so in the next 10 minutes or so, I'd like to update you on the progress that we're making at the Food Policy Council towards creating a food system plan to bring that about. I'll mention some of the other initiatives we're working on too, and then finally share our hopes for the future and hopefully get some feedback from the folks present today. So most of you are probably very familiar with this planning process that we're undergoing. And I want to thank you for championing the project to date. It's a 2-year project funded by the legislature and the Community Foundation to be completed in May of next year. And these collaborations are absolutely critical to the success of the endeavor. So thank you so much. The goals of the project, of course, are to bring about a food system that sustains and nourishes all of us. And so we've broken that down into these 6 goals listed. I won't read through everything for sake of time today, but I will say that what's really wonderful about doing food system work in general is that they all reinforce each other. And so making progress in any one of these areas, we're always keeping an eye on how that will affect everyone else in the food system. So for the process that we're going through at the moment, we're going to first identify key challenges, vulnerabilities, and assets in the food system. And that's what we've been doing in these last 12 months. Katie Hallis provided staff support to conduct stakeholder interviews, distribute community surveys, and she hired an outreach coordinator to run focus groups. So the team reached out to people participating in a variety of food-related endeavors, as well as everyday consumers with various preferences and food budgets. And so second, what we aim to do is tell the stories and voice the concerns and hold up the hopes of everyone who eats by having these conversations on an ongoing basis with feedback and constant growth and learning. The next step in our planning process will be to articulate some shared recommendations for future actions and policies that are based upon what we're hearing. And then fourth, once these recommendations have been drafted, it's our hope that some may lead to immediate changes that move us towards our shared long-term vision, and that more complicated recommendations will initiate their own planning process as stakeholders assess how to bring them about. So I want to share with you that in doing so, we're really working to make sure that this is a democratic endeavor. We have over 30 volunteers on the food system planning team, and we're very focused on ensuring that we hear from diverse voices in Tompkins so the process can be owned collectively. This is in line with our values, but is also critical to success because implementation is going to require broad community support. So as you can see here, we have a number of people who have engaged with us through surveys and through in-depth hour-long interviews, as well as supporting the process by serving on a working group, reading through the data and the recommendations, et cetera. And we have 5 CCE employees and 7 interns who have supported the project to date. And so here we are in July after an enormous amount of data collection, and we have hundreds of pages drafted that describe the local food system and how to place it in the regional and national system that we inhabit. We refer to this as our baseline assessment, and we've broken it into 5 sections. The production, food environment, which includes the infrastructure of distributors, retailers, institutions, emergency feeding operations, all the places that provide the mechanisms to wash, process, package, and distribute food. Consumer habits here in Tompkins is the third. Food access and security considerations, and then finally food waste. So these 5 reports are all currently being reviewed by multiple working groups that are reading and editing for clarity, completeness, and tone. And each working group also has a specific focus based on its interest and expertise. So we have an environment group, an equity group, a nutrition group, and an economy group. And then it'll be our role as the support staff and project team to integrate all of that feedback into the working documents that we use to facilitate further conversations. So next, each of these 6 sections will be condensed into executive summaries, which we're going to distribute to the community through our website and other means. We hope to present this summary information and initial reflections to the legislature on August 17th, and then to the broader community starting with a fall kickoff event in late September. And then throughout the winter, we'll keep hosting gatherings of various sizes to facilitate conversations in each municipality and with different community groups. Next spring, we'll go back into a collective writing process, this time focused on recommendations, and present that working plan to the legislature and the public and the stakeholders next May. So while that concludes the specific project cycle that we've been in, it's really only the beginning of the work needed to bring about changes in the food system. Implementation is going to require additional coordination with you and with local governments, nonprofit organizations, and area businesses. So at the Food Policy Council, we identified 3 proposed areas to focus on to support implementation. And I'm really eager to hear your thoughts about their feasibility and potential impact. So I'll complete my overview in another moment. And then I hope if there's time, we could maybe return to some of these specific proposals at that time. So all 3 of these proposals were included in an over target request for the next fiscal year presented by CCE Director Ken Schlother on behalf of the Food Policy Council. He requested $20,000 to continue to provide staff support to these endeavors. And then to supplement that request, we have also secured funding from the Community Foundation that continues ongoing outreach efforts to make sure we hear input from as many residents as possible. So here's what we've proposed going forward. First, we hope to provide support for local governments and organizations to implement recommendations. So this support may include seeking collaborative funding, facilitating conversations, providing summaries of best practices used elsewhere, and other administrative support as needed. Secondly, we would like to follow the lead of other communities and develop and gather signatures on a Tompkins Food Future Charter, which is based on the food system plan. A charter will encourage stakeholders to become champions. They can provide endorsements and provide funding as sponsors, and that will build broad support through this mechanism, critical to creating a coordinated effort for ongoing systemic changes and building some kind of sustainability into food policy work here in Tompkins. And then third, we'd like to support the development of a food system dashboard, which would be a user-friendly database for producers, institutions, food agencies, and consumers, so that they can gain regularly updated food system information and find ways to engage and collaborate. We already have so much information to share after everything we've done this year, and we look forward to providing structure to our data to make it useful to a broad audience and to facilitate ongoing feedback that's transparent and broadly accessible. So before I conclude today, I wanted to just briefly draw your attention to a few additional activities at the Food Policy Council. By supporting our work, it makes the council and its support staff available to the community. This has led to some additional collaborations and advocacy efforts that have just arisen organically. So we have been working with the Ithaca Green New Deal to make sure that food system considerations are integrated into the proposals. We've also provided a sustainability plan for the COVID-19 Food Task Force, which was called together March of last year and is really focused on attending to crises and disruptions. And so what we're doing is making sure that that infrastructure is there for anything in the future that requires it to reconvene again. And I think we're, by working as a food policy council in sort of a formalized way, we've been able to then network with other food policy councils around the country, as well as with the Food Policy Network, which is a national organization run by Johns Hopkins University. It means there's a framework in place, right? And these best practices are being established. We're able to see implementation in other communities and see how it's working before we go forward with it here. And so I just think that that capacity building for Tompkins is another crucial thing that the Food Policy Council is providing. So that concludes my summary. I'd be really pleased to hear your thoughts or any questions about what we've done so far or what we hope to achieve going forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Baz. I was just thinking as we're trying to get someone here or, to give us the update, with you saying, so-and-so is up, so-and-so is off, you could have fooled me, exactly, everything that sounds like everything that's going on. And so thank you for a really thorough and in-depth update. I'll open it up to any questions. Deborah Dawson?
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Baz. It's nice to meet you. And it's good that you're there to stand in for five other people. I have a couple of questions, actually. Could you reiterate what the 5 baseline sections are?
Absolutely. Yeah, because it's a very integrated, complex web in the food system, we chose 5 sections and there's some overlap. It's a little arbitrary, different places do it different ways, but we broke it down into food production, the food environment, consumption, food access and security, and food waste.
Okay, thank you. And then the other question I had was about this OTR for this year. I know that earlier this year, we were told that your timeline got thrown off a bit because of the pandemic and that you were going to need some funding to finish the report through the middle of next year. Is this $20,000 OTR that you mentioned, does that include the cost of finishing the report, or is that just the costs of the next step after the report is finished?
That's an excellent question. My understanding is that this is for next steps. So that we have the plan in place to complete the project by next May, and that we have the funding that we need to make that happen. and that it's really at that point for implementation that we would like to keep some staff support going, because it really has facilitated momentum at the Food Policy Council. And it also facilitates work being done by community members who can't contribute without compensation. And so that's another important element. And that's part of why the Community Foundation has contributed as well, to make sure that people can be compensated for their time.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions? I have just a couple. As when you're talking about the what's the page moving towards implementation and the Tompkins County Future Charter, and so you talked about people encouraging people to become champions, providing endorsements, providing funding. This, I guess I'm not really sure what the charter is, or is that still in development?
Right, that's a great question. So we have not yet developed it. It's something that we have seen happen with other food policy councils in other areas of the country. They tend to be a fairly high level value statement about the kind of food system that we would all like to bring about. And what it does is it sort of almost in the vein of collective impact, right? It creates a shared mission statement for a very diverse group of stakeholders to rally around. And so it does also mean that anytime there's negotiations or collaboration underway, that charter can be pointed to as the reason why a certain decision is being made at that time. And so, it really is, it's a common mission statement, a fairly high level one. And it would be developed after the plan's complete, sort of based on the language that resonates best with the most people. And the idea of having champions, basically signatories to it, who both represent themselves, but also perhaps represent organizations or foundations with assets to contribute towards the work, that just provides a way to create an endeavor that brings in money, as well as voices from various stakeholders, so that it won't continue to be something that is solely funded by the legislature and specific grant requests. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. So thank you. It's I always think it's good to get more people involved, more organizations, and then it helps get the word out more about this. So so it sounds like the Food Policy Council is going to be an ongoing an entity, and that is that so what happens in other communities when they've done this?
Yes, and often it's launched by a planning process. There's actually some formal ways that there are some federal government grants that sometimes initiate this, and that's sort of been there's a few different iterations of what a Food Policy Council can look like. Sometimes it's an independent organization, as it is currently here. Sometimes it's embedded within the government, which is another option. And so we can explore that at another date. But I do think that having an active Food Policy Council ongoing creates a way to create conversations that bring those community voices to the legislature and to other local municipalities in a way that really is grassroots and democratic, but then also happens, alongside all of the various things that the government is going to be occupied with on an ongoing basis.
Right. I mean, I think it's really great, all the outreach you've done and really looking at the grassroots level in addition to the high level. And so my last question is, I think I know the answer, but on that same page, the food system dashboard, so there is, you do mention consumers. So you're envisioning, because some place where people can go, look online, or I don't know if they could call in, or maybe some of it will be available from 211. Because I know a lot of times, especially through the pandemic, people that weren't hooked in before to figuring out, how to deal with food insecurity, now, we're looking, where do I get food? And, people online, we're trying to help them. Well, there's one right near your house, but it's only open Monday afternoons and it's Friday and I need food now. And then there's, saying, oh, well, I just saw this even the other day, over the weekend. Somebody's saying, well, this other pantry will actually deliver to your house any day of the week. And so is that the type of thing that you're envisioning on this dashboard to be able to help people?
That's wonderful to hear your summary. You're absolutely correct. And this project really came out of the Food Task Force, which I was heavily involved with. And I'm chairing up the Food System Dashboard Working Group. And my partner is John Mazzello from 211. And so what this really is our organizations and all the pantry community and the Food Bank of Southern Tier is involved, that all of us are sort of coming together saying that anytime, so first of all, the information is overwhelming already in the best of times. And then as soon as there's disruption, it took a lot to try to get current information out to the community on a regular basis. And so especially before there's another emergency food distribution sort of crisis, it would be really great to have this up and running so that, yes, consumers can find pantries, open restaurants, sliding scale options, SNAP retailers, WIC retailers, all in one location. And that also organizations can see what kind of ways they could collaborate with one another to be as efficient and lean as possible.
Great. That's all I have to say to that. It's really exciting. And I also just lastly want to say that sometimes we have surveys, reports, to really dive in depth regarding certain projects or certain aspects of things in the that are affecting the community. But with this, we have not just a report, but ongoing support to make the recommendations happen. So thank you so much for your work on this. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
No, just to thank you all for your time today, and please reach out to me and to the rest of the Food Policy Council if you have any other questions. And otherwise, hopefully I'll see some of you at the August 17th meeting.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Baz.
Thank you.
Okay. Next up on our agenda is Liz Thomas. Liz, would you like to go ahead and tell us what you'll be talking about today?
Yeah, I'm hoping to give you a better idea of what the Cuba Lake Watershed Intermunicipal Organization does and some of our goals for the future. So I do have a PowerPoint, if you wouldn't mind me sharing that.
Go ahead.
Let's see. All right, I have to say I'm really impressed with the other speakers, and it is pretty easy to see you if I have the gallery view. So I can't see your expressions, but I can at least see each of you, and it's nice to see you. Yeah, and thank you for the Zoom option as well. It is kind of nice not to drive into the car. All right, so here we are, and I do thank you for your time. I know you added this to your agenda, and I appreciate it because I know you're all busy. So again, a little better idea of what CUYO is. That's the Cuba Lake Watershed Intermunicipal Organization. And what do we do and how do we fit with all the other organizations that you've heard of? So CUYO is the watershed-wide organization for municipalities and governments. So it's often confused with the Cuba Lake Watershed Network, which is our sister organization of volunteers and advocates. So we represent municipalities. Again, watershed-wide is the Community Science Institute that does so much monitoring, and they are great too. So not to get confused, and we'll go into more about what each of us does. So let me just have a look at the watershed really quick. This is the topography of the watershed. Tompkins County makes up 43% of the Cuba Lake watershed. It's the largest watershed in the Finger Lakes and is part of Lake Ontario watershed. A different way of looking at it is its sub-watersheds, of which there are 46. And I can send you this so you can see more of the detail. And another way of looking at at the watershed is through municipalities, and there are 50 municipalities, 7 counties. It's big. 24 municipalities paid their dues for this year. The organization was founded in 1998, and it was staffed for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years back in the early 2000s. We have some guiding documents that we work from. The first, which is not actually up here, was developed in 2000. It's called the Watershed Characterization Report. It has data and physical characteristics of the lake and watershed. Then the next year, following up on that and using that data, was the first Restoration and Protection Plan. Then there was a big gap, and in 2017, 16 years later, it was the Restoration and Protection Plan. This document was updated. And then the following year, the DEC put out this harmful algal bloom action plan for Cayuga Lake. And those are 2 really great plans that give us direction for work that needs to be done. So the threats, and I'll go through these quickly because you already know these, but storm events with increased runoff, bringing sedimentation, pollutants, and damage from flooding. There are economic losses, health problems, and with climate change, the forecast is for higher rainfall events. So we may be seeing more of this and have to be ready. Of course, there are harmful algal blooms, and even though we're seeing more of those, that science is still a little unclear about what exactly is causing them. What is, we know some of the factors, but not all of the triggers. There are invasive species. All right, so let's look at solutions. Preventing pollution at its source is key. And to do that, we need to identify the most important projects that need to be done. So we're getting there on identifying them, but the getting done is a big challenge. We work with Soil and Water Conservation District offices, and they have key knowledge for us that we really appreciate. Most of them are understaffed, and while their work on ag is really important, and most of them do focus mainly on ag, there are other areas that need to be covered as well, and they just don't have time sometimes to address those. CLEO is developing a living list of impactful projects that we want to implement. We need the money to do that, and most of the money for other watersheds comes through grants. We need somebody to write and administer those grants to bring the money in to the watershed. More solutions, monitoring. Consistent monitoring of the lakes and the tributaries is necessary to understand the threats and to identify problem areas. The state and federal government has really surprisingly limited resources for monitoring. So it falls on local municipalities and nonprofits and community volunteers to do that. And the Community Science Institute and Cayuga Lake Watershed Network have really been our heroes on Cayuga Lake in getting that done. CLEO does not have enough money. We do not have any money going towards monitoring. More solutions, regulation, local regulations that local municipalities and governments can enact can have a profound effect on water quality issues. So we have best management practices, not only just for agriculture, but for all land uses, stormwater regulations to reduce runoff, illicit discharge laws, setbacks and septic system testing. Counties can really help on this. And I know, I should have prefaced this, that I know that the counties have a lot that they're doing, and you know, we're always asking like you to do more. So know that I'm trying to raise awareness, but not trying that I'm fully aware that everybody's busy, but it is, counties are in a good position to help municipalities to understand why these protective laws are important. And given the nature of water, rules are most effective when implemented on a watershed-wide scale. We've seen that just with one project that we're working on having to do with 6 Mile Creek Vineyard, where the town of Ithaca's land and the 6 Mile Creek Vineyard in the town of Ithaca are impacting the water quality of the city of Ithaca because it goes down into their reservoir. So it's very hard. The city of Ithaca can't do much because it's not in their authority. Let's see. So more solutions, education and outreach to help people understand the issues and corrective actions. And finally, coordination of efforts across the watershed. It's an efficient use of limited resources. And that's CLEO's job, is to help with that coordination. And watershed manager or some staff would help with that. So what is our 2021 work plan? We have this great budget plan. We budgeted $36,000 to spend this year, but we only brought in $20,000, and that's our normal. Great plan, right? We are using a little bit of fund balance, but we thought this was worth doing because we did hire a very part-time watershed manager to help us to implement some of the projects that we have going. So we're trying to increase the member municipalities, and we're developing a job description for a watershed manager using the models that are already in place for Owasco and Canandaigua and Seneca Lake watersheds. The work that we would, well, we have to, oops, wait a second, let me go back one. We do have a living list of projects. They have 29 right now. We will be adding to that and reviewing it every year to identify the most important and most impactful projects that we can be doing. Eventually, and originally, CLEO had its own pot of money for projects to use for match money or projects that don't fit other grant categories very well. So we're hoping to build that up. The state and federal governments do have money, but the grants are generally pretty hard to apply for and time consuming to administer, but there is a lot of money coming out for water quality these days. So a staff person would really help us to leverage the money that we're spending to bring more money into the watershed. Some examples of some of the kind of projects, flooding, erosion, washouts, HABs, invasive species. Let's just look at some of the stakeholders that we have to coordinate. And this is a simpler view here that we've got some local ravens here that can be really raucous. So if they're interrupting, it's our local ravens. So here are some of our stakeholders, the counties here and others on the outside, and there are more. We're also trying to finish up another grant to assess our organization. This is a Park Foundation grant so that we can better assist municipalities in their water protection efforts. We have some examples of very good watershed coordination. Owasco watershed and Canandaigua watershed in particular have been great models for us to follow. And Canandaigua has finished loads of projects, but they've had a watershed manager since 1999. It's really important to have counties on board. Without county buy-in, it's just so much harder to coordinate. It's much easier instead of with the 50 municipalities to coordinate with the 3 main counties that are, that adjoin the lake. Here's a different way of looking at the range of stakeholders with all these state programs, county programs, local, not-for-profits, landowners, and those using the lake. So let's look at the Finger Lakes themselves. Part of our work plan, again, is to fund a watershed manager, or, I mean, they all have different names, actually. Some are watershed stewards and such, but they all are doing the same work. So this is a map of the Finger Lakes, of course, and Cayuga is the largest watershed and does not have a watershed manager. Yeah, we have them for all these other watersheds. So again, we need some base funding. Having someone on board can leverage that money to bring more money into the watershed to do these projects. And so that person would help with education and outreach, promoting best management practices, sharing model legislation, and writing and administering grants. By law, the charge of local governments is to protect the health, safety, and welfare of its residents. And so, clean water is part of that responsibility, I think. So it's just a justification for those taxes, which I know are tight. Let's look at this. These are some of the projects that were accomplished when Cayuga did have a watershed manager in this time frame. There were some larger, grant monies that came in at that time. There's also, this is in Canandaigua, restoration of a sub-watershed that had very poor water quality. And they got a grant and remediated that. Owasco watershed is just going gangbusters with their work. Just as a comparison, well, I think many of you know that they submitted updated watershed rules and regulations, and we're hanging on the state to make a decision on whether they will approve those, because there are some regulations that do affect agricultural best management practices in those plans as well. They're also working on what's called a 9-element plan. They have mobile signs for boat launches, monitoring equipment for streams. And just as a comparison, the soil and water in the Cayuga Owasco watershed brought in $700,000 to work on water quality planning. Another example is just some flooding of a school. They recreated a wetland that would retain the stormwater runoff, and there's no more flooding. So anyway, on to what we're proposing here is what we're calling the fair funding formula. And it takes into account the percentage of land a municipality has in the watershed, the shoreline distance, the population density, and taxable assessed value. Currently, and since 2004, there's been a flat dues rate of $900 per municipality per year. And so what we're aiming for is $90,000 to be implemented over 3 years. So 2/3 of that is we're hoping to come from towns, cities, and villages. And 1/3 of that we're hoping will come from counties. The formula is based on that's used in Canandaigua and the Seneca watersheds. And the outcome of that is this, which, as you can see, because Tompkins County is 43% of the watershed, is the largest amount of dues of any of the counties. The CUIO did vote in June to go forth with these requests, and the budget letters will go out soon, but we're working separately with counties because the budget processes are all a little different. And then if you look at the particular municipalities within Tompkins County, at least, here's what they result in. And the municipalities with more shoreline and acres in the watershed, of course, are a lot higher. And then the city of Ithaca, of course, with its higher taxable assessed value and population, is also higher. So you can see some go up from that 900 and some go down. And again, the recommendation is to phase this in over 3 years, although recognizing that the sooner we can get more money in the door, the sooner we can hire staff. So, and just as a comparison, last year, the city of Auburn had $200,000 that they contributed to water quality work, and the town of Owasco, $70,000. So they do have some, commitments there. Of course, Owasco does have some serious problems with HABs. One thing to emphasize is this does not include funding for the Community Science Institute. I personally think that it would be a good idea to fold their funding into this at some point in the future so that it would be more fair. But for now, it does not include that. So anyway, we're ramping up. We have big hopes. We have a great many volunteers. And what can Tompkins County do? I guess that I'm asking to support this funding request for a watershed manager and projects, and to submit project ideas in 2022. We're hoping that that continues and that we can continue to apply for funding for that. Again, we have 2 projects that are going, a ditch assessment tool that we're applying for funding for, and then the 6 Mile Creek Vineyard. There's a big erosion problem there. And finally, keep in touch, appoint a representative to attend our meetings, or at least keep tabs of what's going on, who can report back to you. And of course, I'm happy to always report to you at any time. So that's it for me. Are there questions?
Thank you, Liz, for a really thorough presentation. Some of those pictures are just astounding, to see different things that have happened. Any questions from the members or anybody in attendance? Deborah.
Yeah, hi Liz. I don't really have a question because I attended the CLIO meetings for a couple of years, and I think Amanda's replaced me on CLIO this year. I just wanted to stress to everyone, in case they missed it, that the Watershed Intermunicipal Organization has no paid employees. Everything they do is done by volunteers, who include people like Roxy Johnson and Cynthia Brock and Liz and T.N. Hunter, people who don't really have a lot of time to do very much. This prioritization process that they're in the process of doing was largely funded by a grant from New York State that enabled CLIO to hire somebody to actually put together all this input from various organizations like the soil and water districts and the various towns and villages. If it hadn't been for that money, they couldn't have done this prioritization project. And I will say that the next steps are virtually impossible without a substantial increase in funding, because without a watershed manager to coordinate this stuff and write grants and promote collaboration and communicate and facilitate communication among the constituent municipalities, none of this stuff's going to get done. And I think too that people should be aware that after waiting years and years for this TMDL from New York State, the TMDL that we got is fraught with error and puts a really disproportionate burden on smaller farms in agriculture in the county, which is not helpful. They, for some reason, DEC decided that the speedies permits for point sources of pollution were foolproof, and therefore anybody who had a speedies permit didn't need to change their ways. Ditto for the CAPOs. So it's a big problem, and I know that we're facing a lot of requests for more money this year, and it's going to be a tough couple of years, but I really urge all of you to support this if you can, because I know that CLIO has worked for 2 or 3 years now on developing a fair funding formula. And I know that Ronnie's worked on the committee that put this proposal together. So you can be sure it's a quality proposal. Anyway, thanks all for listening.
Thank you, Deborah. So I had a question for you, Liz. So this is phased in over 3 years. And you talked about other municipality or other watersheds for their watershed manager. Do the other watersheds have similar funding plan? I want to say schemes, but that's not always a great word, the United States. Other countries use it a different way. So, but, so do they have other different ways, similar ways to fund their watershed manager?
The Seneca Lake Watershed was fortunate enough to get Pam Helming, their state senator, to fund their watershed manager for 3 years running. And so he's done, that's Ian Smith, and we have a little bit of his time this year simply because that funding has is expiring and they don't have enough to pay him. So we're paying him a little bit for a little bit of his time. So his job this year is actually he's doing the same thing in the Seneca watershed as I'm doing here. And we worked together to look at each other's funding formulas. They're very similar. This funding formula is essentially the same as Canandaigua's, except for they have a tourism at factor, which their watershed manager said, don't use this. It's really complicated and time consuming to add in. So that's not in there. But Owasco has so much, I guess because the lake is so much more compromised than Cayuga Lake, those municipalities around Owasco are just paying in at very high rates. I wouldn't call it fair. I wouldn't call it even yet, but some of the municipalities, particularly the ones that draw drinking water from the lake, are really anteing up. So Owasco, no, but Seneca, yes. Cayuga, yes. And Canandaigua, yes. Similar formulas. Yep.
It sounds like this is probably a good thing to figure out, how to do it, in a fair way to begin with. So I'm really happy with that. And so Martha has a question in a second. I'm just trying to see it. Well, if I have any other questions, I'll ask after you. Go ahead, Martha.
Thank you, Annie. Hi, Liz.
Hi.
So I hope you'll send this full PowerPoint around to have it sent to all legislators. This is the sort of funding request that would go through the Department of Planning and Sustainability to be considered in their budget proposal. Have you done that?
Here's Katie.
I've been listening to you all. Yes, it'll show up in your budget as an over target request for dues increases for QIO, for Southern Tier 8, which the HUD committee heard about that last week. And also our ICLEI dues for the greenhouse gas emissions accounting are going up as well. So it's an OTR with 3 components.
Okay, so how much did you put in for this?
Well, it's an escalating approach. So it's for 2022, we put in $5,749.
Okay, thank you, Katie. Appreciate that. So Liz, so you said by the end of the 3rd year, it'd be 90,000 from Tompkins plus all of Tompkins municipalities. Is that right?
No. It's 90,000 from all 50, from the 50 municipalities and the 7 counties.
Okay.
So yeah, the total for Tompkins County is much less than that.
Okay. I thought that would be kind of a lot. Okay. All right. 90,000 is sort of the base ongoing budget then.
Yeah. And the other, just to, I think maybe, Anne, this was part of your question too, the target request that we're going for is less than Seneca Lake and Canandaigua Lake are actually putting in requests for 130,000. That's just what they're doing. And we thought that was would be too hard of a pill to swallow. So we're starting at 90,000.
So are you going around to all the municipalities in the county?
Yeah, I'm just asking if municipalities would like me to present. I've done probably 7 presentations so far. One to TCOG, we went to the Seneca County Board of Supervisors that actually received it very well and said that they thought that this would qualify for the stimulus funding. There was some category of the stimulus funding, water quality category, that they thought they could use the stimulus funding for. So they were looking at actually paying, I don't expect you to do this, but they were looking to pay for not only the county dues, but also all of the municipal dues out of that stimulus funding for year one. And they're actually looking at a septic system testing program, not quite as Cadillac as Cayuga County, but Seneca County is really ramping up in its understanding of what the threats are. So that's really great news, because we haven't really been engaging in that part of the lake as much as we would like. So that's great.
If they're talking about the American Rescue Plan funds, then that's one-time funding.
Right.
So it's, generous, but it's after that's used up, they'd have to pick it up on their
Exactly.
ongoing. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Liz.
I guess it would make it a little less painful at first.
So a couple of questions. So at what point, if this is phased in, the dues increases phased in over 3 years? I guess two questions. One is, why aren't you asking for now the full amount? And because I'm just wondering when you'd be able to hire the watershed manager. Won't this delay being able to hire them?
Yeah, it will. And I think the letter is going to be worded something like, if you can pay the whole amount, that's the sooner we can get money in the door, the sooner we can, get staffed up. But the required amount would be 50%. So agreed, this was sort of a compromise proposal with that. I mean, CWEO's big, and so there were lots of people weighing in on this, and the majority of people thought that this 3-year phased-in approach would be the best way to go.
So at what point would you be able to hire the watershed manager, do you think?
Well, I mean, we do have part of Ian Smith's time right now, and I must say, I can talk to you about the overview of what CWEO does, but it's just amazing to me talking to Ian, just the breadth of knowledge and depth of knowledge he has about water resources. And, when he and Roxy Johnson from the city and Darby start talking about actual water issues, they really know their stuff. So anyway, Ian is working for us just a bit this year. And I did ask him if he would be able to work for us some more next year. So their Seneca watershed is looking to have an assistant for him. So we're not sure how it's going to look, because we don't know how much money we're going to bring in. But Ian works out of the Finger Lakes Institute at Hobart and William Smith. So I think there's some flexibility there to get a part-time person on, so that to ease some of his work, so he can help us with some more of the technical problems that we have. So I guess I can't really answer your question because we don't know how much money we're going to bring in.
Right. Well, that does answer my question, or my concern that my overall concern of, how fast you can get somebody on board. But it sounds like you have somebody that can help as much as you are able to pay them for now, and that will increase, whether it's that person or somebody else, that amount of time that they'll be able to help you, and the number of issues they'll be able to help you with will increase over the next 3 years. That sound about right?
That's what we're aiming for, yes.
And another question on your slide with the municipalities, with the bubbles, you only had 6 counties, but you said there's 7 counties?
Oh, right. That's because, there's, so check this out. I don't know if you can see this very well. Oops. Anyways, there's I'm never going to be able to find this.
You'll get there eventually, don't worry about it.
Yeah, there's one county way up by Junius or something that's like this county right here that has like 10 acres. So we count them, even though the dues from that county are like nothing. It's really 3 main counties and
Okay.
3 other sort of main counties and 1 teeny weeny county.
Okay, thank you. This question that maybe is more for Katie, but as far as the monies for Community Science Institute, is that something that you'll be putting forth? I know we did an OTR last year for them. For
Yeah,
the water quality monitoring.
for this year's budget, so in 2020 or 2019, I don't remember, we made the argument that really environmental health should be the ones coordinating the CSI work, because that's, we don't need to duplicate efforts and, just making sure things run smoothly. So that went over to public health budgeting. So I don't know what they put in for CSI for 2022 budget.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? Liz, thank you so much. I'm picturing you there on your front porch, is that? And you have a view, I think, of the Black Diamond Trail, or pretty close there.
It is pretty close. We are very, very fortunate. Yep.
Well, great. So thank you very much for coming today and explaining all this to us and doing all the work to help bring the group forward in line with other communities. I mean, I certainly, with not just seeing the pictures, but hearing about recent floods. And I believe the other day I heard that Taganic Park was closed for swimming because of hags. So it's an issue. Huge issues, and with the TMDL report, that was underwhelming to say the least. So it's good to get somebody else to be working and organizing all this. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for your time. And yes, I will be addressing a number of municipalities in Tompkins County. So I'm hoping for good reception. So far, the reception of everyone I've talked to has been very sympathetic. I mean, I think that it's, you see those habs in the lake and people not being able to swim and recreate and drink the water for those that are pulling it straight out of the lake. And it's pretty heartbreaking. So yeah, there's certainly some understanding that's right in front of our face. So I do appreciate your time very much. Thank you for putting me on.
Thank you, Liz. Okay, now for committee members, does anybody have a report? Okay, just 2 things that I wanted to say as far as a little bit of a chair's report. When for the DEC comments that some of us signed on to, I did send those out on Friday to the DEC. So those were comments in regards to the proposed oil and gas, the updated oil and gas regulations. So that was sent out, and that's going to be included with the minutes for today's meeting. So we have a record of that. And so thank you to everybody that signed on to that. And last thing is I looked this up as we were transitioning from one thing to another, but we mentioned snowmobiles earlier, and I looked it up. Are there electric snowmobiles? And yes, there are at least one company starting electric snowmobiles. So they'll be probably a lot quieter and more environmentally friendly. So I'm happy to see that. And I did just order my first electric hybrid bicycle. So my hopes are to drive down to some meetings here, or at least be able to drive more around without having to even use a bigger car, and to also get a little exercise while I'm doing that. So anything else anybody has before we adjourn? All righty, we've got a shorter meeting today, so thank you, everybody, and thank you to the clerks, Brittany and Katrina, as usual. I forgot to mention earlier, Amanda notified me last night she was not going to be able to come to today's meeting, so thank you, everybody.
Thank you.